Good morning, my friends. I am Jennifer Welch, subbing for our beloved Don Lemon while he's on a much needed vacation. Welcome to this special edition of the Don Lemon Show. We are going to discuss the piping hot tea surrounding the Diddy trial. As you know, Nikki and Peter are always here. Even when Don's out of town, they work hard. And today I want to welcome Charles with TMZ. Charles, give us all the tea on the Diddy trial, the deliberations. We're chomping at the bit for what you have to say.
So, Jennifer, the timing could not have been better or maybe worse. You might hear the commotion behind me. The verdict is in. So we know that yesterday the jury said that they had reached a verdict on 4 counts, but they had not. They were deadlocked on the racketeering, count 1. We just got word that they are now coming back into the court. They have a verdict, which unfortunately means, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave you guys because we are getting ready to do our show and we are going to be going live. So we're all waiting to see whether it's going to be one or two things here, right? Either the jury has reached a verdict on racketeering and we're going to hear all of the verdict on all counts, or they're going to come back into the judge and say, we are still deadlocked, we cannot reach a verdict, and then the judge is going to have to decide whether to declare a mistrial or
Charles,
send them back
Don Lemon here.
again.
Can I ask you a question? Charles, I know that you have to go. What does it mean this soon, if it's coming this soon? What do you think that means?
If I'm just guessing, and that's all I can do at this point, is they are still deadlocked. I mean, they were less than an hour in deliberations this morning. Did the two or more people who were holding out yesterday suddenly change their minds that quickly? I don't think so. So I think they're going to say they're still deadlocked on racketeering.
All right, Charles, I know you have to go. Hi, Jen.
So we'll see what the judge does.
Please
Pretty
come back,
exciting.
Charles, and
At
we'll
least
be
we didn't have to wait all day, right?
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you so much,
Charles.
Charles.
All right, guys.
Hi, Jen.
you.
Wow. Here we go.
Wow. I mean, that was my first breaking news moment, you guys, ever. That was exciting.
First of many, I'm sure.
Can you guys hear me fairly well? Okay, can you hear me okay?
Is there any way you can?
Yeah,
I was going to say, can you turn up your audio or maybe get closer to
I can't
the
really
mic?
turn it up. This is it. How about
Oh,
that?
that's better. That's better.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is what trafficking and interstate trafficking, prostitution, and this is the RICO charge. The RICO charge is the one that's the big one. As I was just speaking to a journalist who was inside the courtroom, who's Mona Kosar, and to other attorneys, here's the thing is that the RICO charge can cause him to lose his entire fortune. And so he's going to fight tooth and nail for that, I'm sure. And it was interesting to me because I was wondering why they just didn't say, okay, we'll accept it as it is. We don't, the defense meaning, we don't want them to go back in because, we would rather him take this 10 to 15 years rather, because the RICO charge comes with a possible life and the loss of his fortune. So, I mean, it's interesting to me that the attorneys, if I'm correct, did not argue for them to just stop it right here and take what was on the table. So here we go. I mean, and look, they came in, I think this morning at 9 o'clock, which is just about an hour ago, and they already saying, hey, we have a verdict. So that means Charles is probably right. We don't know for sure. And then again, there is a juror who had been problematic and, rolling of the eyes and making faces and that kind of thing reportedly in the courtroom. And they believe, as the judge was reading the instructions and listening to them yesterday, that this was, sort of had a smirk on her face and it's like, oh my gosh, or whatever. They believe this may be the holdout, or at least one of the holdouts in the courtroom, but we're going to have to wait to see what happens. But boy, what a suspense. I just did an interview with a reporter in the courtroom, and I can't remember a more anticipated verdict, Jen, than OJ. I don't believe this is the same level, but celebrity appeal, or at least celebrity acknowledgement and awareness, and considering where he is in the celebrity universe, pretty darn close.
I think it's very close. I think when you have celebrity trials, and I think of Michael Jackson, I think of OJ, you think of others. But back to OJ, I remember, Don, you and I are old enough to remember that was kind of the birth of the 24-hour news cycle. And we didn't have it on our phones. So we would race home to watch the court proceedings that day on CNN or whatever network. And now it breaks so quickly with the phones. But I have a question for you, Don. Is it the RICO charges will bankrupt him because there are heavy penalties with that? What's the
Yes, I think the RICO
bankrupt
charge,
him?
I'm not an attorney, but this is my understanding, is that the RICO charge, obviously it was for mob bosses, that kind of thing, syndicate, and so what they wanted to do in those cases is take away their ability to be able to have influence and continue on with what was perceived to be an illegal operation. And so their finances, their worth, that was on the line and could be taken away. Their attorneys on the defense side have been arguing all along that this RICO should not even be part of this case, and that it was overreach. The interesting thing too, as well, is when they could not reach a verdict yesterday, they were they believe that by forcing them to go back in, that there was some sort of coercion. And perhaps that they were overreaching or at least would bully, the folks who had already made up their minds into going along with the majority. And so that's why sometimes they're not happy with having to go back in and do this after they say, hey, look, we can't come to a decision here. We can't come to a consensus.
Do we have any of the makeup, gender, race on the jurors that have the quote unpersuadable opinions? Do y'all have any tea on that?
We don't, unfortunately.
We don't know.
We know the jury is comprised of 8 men and 4 women, which is very interesting. I imagine, I do not know this as a fact, I have no reporting on this, but I imagine Diddy's team likely pushed to try and have the jury weighted more heavily towards men than women, but I don't know. Don, Nikki, and Jen, I have a question for you all. Yesterday, Katie Fang, and I have some news. Don, if you haven't checked your phone, Katie Fang will be joining us shortly along with Symone Redwine. So Lemonheads out there, we have some phenomenal attorneys who will be joining us in just moments, so stand by. But I do find this interesting. Deliberations started on Monday. This is Wednesday morning. 6 weeks of trial, 6 weeks of testimony. 7 weeks of testimony they sat through. And yet in just over 12 hours, they came to first a partial verdict, then with 1 extra hour, now apparently a final verdict. Are you surprised by this? Katie Fang yesterday told us that within 2 hours, the jury had sent the judge a note saying that that juror number 3 was being uncooperative and was not following the judge's directions. Over the course of those 12 hours, the jury sent the judge 5 subsequent notes asking for multiple questions. Katie Fang yesterday says that that is indicative of an extremely chaotic deliberation room. Any thoughts on that? What do you think is going on inside that room? Why is this such a chaotic deliberation? It seems the facts of the case to me seem relatively straightforward.
You're asking
I
me
think
why,
the celebrity factor, don't you, Don? Whenever you have
why
the
is it so chaotic?
get your mic, Don.
Oh, sorry. No.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
now
now.
that's better.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jen. Go ahead.
I think the celebrity factor just throws in this extra passenger in the jury room. And I think that when you have a figure like O.J. Simpson or P. Diddy or Michael Jackson, it's impossible to have a completely objective juror because we all have been exposed to this person in some way or another. Furthermore, as Americans, we really like the celebrity aspect of our culture. And so I think that that adds this other component into these jury rooms. My husband's a criminal defense attorney. And so when he's trying cases in Oklahoma City, you don't have this type of drama in the jury room because most of the people that he represents, they're not celebrities. And so I think you always see this with celebrity trials. There's an extra passenger in the jury room, and that is the cloud and the figure of this person's celebrity that is also sitting in the room. What you think they were, what you believe they were, how much we appreciate success, we appreciate hustle, we appreciate wealth. And there's that sitting in the jury room with this evidence of what appears to be crimes. And I think that is a component that goes into these celebrity cases that the jurors have a really hard time wrestling with.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that, but I also think it's even more than that. I just think that the jurors they're from different places, which is where, different places, probably socioeconomically, different ethnicities, different genders. And I think that, there is still, similar to the OJ trial, there's still a group of people who believe, rightly or wrongly, this is my assessment, that this was somehow a setup, because I'm still getting people in the comments saying, why didn't they go this hard after Donald Trump? Why is Donald Trump
Totally
not in jail? Why are they going after this black man in society? And there's still who is a self-made billionaire. And that's the reporting coming from the courtroom. And also that is the consensus among many people in our society, whether that's real or not. Look, we know that racism is real. Obviously, you know that your husband is a defense attorney, and it's baked into the legal system, and it's just baked into the system. We have systemic racism in this country. I don't know if that is, perhaps that is part of it, but that's not the only thing in this case. We've seen Diddy beating a woman. We've seen it on tape. We know people who have accused him of certain things. We know that he paid money to have that go away. We know reportedly that there have been other cases that he is reportedly made to go away or to silence people. So it is complicated. But I do believe that there are people who believe, look, this was his private life. They were consenting adults. And, if you're going to start, with this one person, why not others? Why not, again, Donald Trump, I'm using him as an example, but why not others who are perhaps involved in similar activities? How can the president of the United States get off? And then you have this man, again, who comes from humble beginnings. Whether or not he's arrogant or not, that's a whole thing. But why are you focusing on him? I know it's complicated. I'm just explaining to you guys.
I have an answer for that. I think number one, there is a justifiable distrust in the Black community towards police. And I can tell you, my husband comes home and a lot of his clients,
policing and the justice system, right?
correct,
Yeah.
and the system. And my husband will come home and I'll hear him on the phone with a client of color and he will say, the cops lie. And they're like, well, I know that's right. And, living in a white suburban space my whole life, for a lot of white people, that's a weird thing to hear, that the cops would lie. But it's true. They lie all of the time and they over police Black communities. So that speculation is a component in all of this. And to all of the people in the comment section that ask, why didn't they go after Donald Trump this hard? I 1,000,000% agree. And we all know the answer to that is because he's a rich white man. And so Justice is supposed to, Lady Justice, she's supposed to have a blindfold on. In the United States of America, she's never had a blindfold on. And we all know that. But we all have to be objective and look at each of these, like Don says, there's a video of him beating a woman. And so a lot of things can be true at the same time. Lemon heads, a lot of things can be true. Does Lady Justice have her blindfold off? Yes. Should Donald Trump have been, should that MFer be in prison right now? Oh my God, yes, absolutely. Is the Black community over policed and misrepresented in the justice system? 100% yes. Did Diddy beat women and probably guilty of a lot of these things? Probably yes. So we have to have compound feelings about all of these things, and a lot of things can be true at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. If you are just joining us, you're watching the Don Lemon Show on the Don Lemon Channel. This is Hot Topics here with Jen Welch from I've Had It With podcast. I've Had It podcast, and also joining us now, Katie Fang from the attorney from the Midas Touch Network. This is breaking news. The jury in the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs announced just moments ago that they have reached a full verdict in the music an agreement on a racketeering conspiracy charge, that it had been deadlocked on an agreement, whether they're still deadlocked or they have come to a decision on it, guilty or innocent. Jurors said yesterday that they had agreed on the other 4 counts, 2 each of sex trafficking, transportation, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Katie Fang, you're just joining us, coming in this early. Welcome to the program with Jen and I, and we've got Peter and Nikki here as well. What do you say? When the last we spoke yesterday evening, they were going back. They said, hey, we're going to go back and we're going to try again. And just, I mean, not even an hour almost into deliberations, and here we are. What do you think?
Well, Katie, you predicted this, no? You predicted this, right?
I did, considering the fact that they had already reached a verdict on 4 out of the 5. I predicted that we wouldn't even get to lunch with this. We wouldn't be ordering lunch for this jury today. They came back at 9, Dawn, and at 9:52 a.m., the note indicated that they had reached a verdict on all the counts. So I want to be clear, too. They didn't say that they were still hung on that count. That's a very, very distinct issue here, right? It's we have a verdict on all counts. I got to tell you, Don, I was chewing over it more last night. Oh, sorry, Don, what did you say?
Not guilty at 1 and 2. You have it. Not guilty on count 1. Go ahead, Katie. What do you have?
If it's not guilty on count 1, I listen.
And count 2.
They're not.
Wow.
Then he's not guilty on everything. Not guilty on everything.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Not guilty on everything, including racketeering.
That's what I think it is.
Well,
that's what
count 1 was racketeering.
Was the racketeering.
Yes.
Counts 2 and 3 dealt with Cassie Ventura. Counts 4 and 5 dealt with Jane, a pseudonym. So let's see what we got going here.
Yeah, and if they didn't find, if count 2 with Cassie Ventura, I agree with you.
Oh, wait.
Guilty on 3.
Count 3, transportation, Mann Act. Count 3 was the Cassie Ventura transportation for purposes of prostitution counts. So
And
very
not guilty on 4 and guilty on 5.
Okay. So
Guilty on 3. So we're guilty on 3 and 5, and not
guilty on 3 and 5. Counts 3 and 5 were the transportation for purposes of prostitution. Count 3 dealt with Cassie Ventura. Count 5 dealt with Jane, a pseudonym for one of his ex-girlfriends. And so what does that mean? That means that he has a maximum exposure of 10 years in prison on each of those counts. And so at this point, the jury did not believe that either Cassie or Jane was sex trafficked. The jury did not believe that the prosecution had carried its burden of proof to be able to prove that racketeering had occurred through a criminal conspiracy or a criminal enterprise run by P. Diddy. And that at this time, they did find him guilty of paying for Cassie Ventura and Jane and other sex workers to fly to cities across the world to participate in freak-offs. It's an interesting verdict.
So what do you? There are folks who are saying I knew he would get off, but did he actually get off? Because I think the maximum on the charges that he's found guilty of, Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, 10 to 15. He's not going to serve that. So this is not life. This is not life. He's not losing his wealth or his fortune because of the racketeering charges. Yes? No?
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't want to do a day in federal prison. So, I mean, up to 10 years on each of these counts. I mean, the judge could do it concurrent, could do it consecutive. I mean, we don't really know what he's actually going to be getting, right? But I do find it to be really interesting, Don, because the jury didn't believe that Cassie or Jane was sex trafficked, because that's what counts 2 and 4 were. But the jury believed that they were transported for purposes of prostitution, which also means then, did they believe that it was an involuntary transport? I mean, holy cow, Don. I mean, this is a bizarre split verdict. Not surprised about the racketeering, considering what we had seen yesterday, but really surprised that 12 jurors came to a unanimous verdict on counts 3 and 5 when it came to the transportation.
Let me just give you the update. You're watching the Don Lemon Show along with Katie Fang and Jen Welch, Peter and Nikki from the Don Lemon Network, from the Lemon Media Network as well. So here it is. Sean Diddy Combs was found guilty of transporting people for prostitution. Jurors convicted the music mogul of a federal felony, but acquitted him on sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy. Sean Combs, who's the hip hop mogul who once ran a sprawling business empire, convicted on Wednesday, convicted just moments ago of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution after an 8-week trial. But a federal jury in Manhattan acquitted Mr. Combs, 55, of the most serious charges against him: sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy, in a case that accused the famed producer of coercing women into unwanted sex with male prostitutes, aided by a team of pliant employees. He was found not guilty of the most serious. That's why, Katie, my question, I don't know what this is going to mean in the court of public opinion, as if he got off, but it's certainly interesting to me that the least of, still serious, right? These are still serious charges, but the least serious of the charges, not guilty in this case. And folks thought, hey, look, this is the Southern District of New York. They don't mess around. They have a 70% or if not higher conviction rate, yada, yada, yada. What say you guys?
I would just add to that, Don. So what this means is, after hearing from 34 witnesses, after deliberating for 13 hours over the span of 3 days, a jury of 12 came to an unanimous verdict that they did not believe that Cassie Ventura and Jane were sex trafficked in any way, which suggests, Dawn, that the jury believed the defense's position, which is they were voluntary participants in these events, these freak-offs, etc., and that the only criminal component of what the prosecution's case was able to prove was that they, as in Cassie and Jane, participated in these freak-offs with paid escorts. So the prostitution component, which frankly, Dawn, to your point, a lot of people day in and day out across the United States and the world are kind of prosecuted or arrested for prostitution, right? And so really at this point, I also think, in a footnote, guys, there was a challenge by the defense as to whether or not the Mann Act, this transportation for purposes of prostitution, whether it was being used appropriately in this case. So I would expect an appeal from the defense on these 2 guilty counts, because they believe that it was not being used for the purposes of why that statute had been put in the first place. I just wanted to add that note.
Jen, as a layperson, someone who watches, right? Because I know that you're very informed about everything, but this isn't your sort of bailiwick. You're an observer here, a professional, but keyed in on other issues in the news. But you've been watching this, I'm sure, peripherally and keeping abreast about as much as most Americans. What do you think of this at this moment?
I think it's really interesting, personally, any sort of trial that's going forward right now in the United States of America, juxtaposed on the split screen with an administration that is pardoning violent criminals, that is not valuing law and order. And I think this juxtaposition at this moment in American history is fascinating. People in the comment sections are saying, why isn't Donald Trump in jail? And so there's never been a better time in the United States of America to be a criminal than under the Trump administration. And so as you see the Trump administration engaging or excusing criminal activity, and then you see the SDNY trying to uphold the rule of law, it is a very interesting split screen for me to see an administration that gaslights and says we are for law and order, but yet they pardon somebody that's wearing a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt that beat up a cop, right? And then you have real people that are prosecutors, career prosecutors, that believe in the rule of law, that want to serve the public. And I just think it's a really wild split screen to kind of zoom the lens out as to what's going on in the country right now.
Yeah, I wonder how much, I don't want to jump ahead, but I've been doing this for a long time, Katie, and you know as well, right? We've been doing this for a long time. How soon before this issue of race comes in, and whether that juror or whoever it was, that they were hung up on that saying, hey, and what Jen said, we got a lot of folks who've been in a lot of things. They're not getting convicted. I'm not going to do that to this man. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've been around long enough. I may have been born yesterday, but it wasn't yesterday morning or evening. I forget what the thing says. I forget how it goes, but you guys know what I'm saying. It is going to come up, and I'm sure it's going to be a huge deal. And perhaps in some weird way, this whole idea of immunity, where the president may have worked in Diddy's favor. I don't know.
Look, I mean, we now see from the reports here that Sean Combs's lawyer is asking that Diddy be released pending sentencing.
Yeah.
Because remember, he's been in custody since last year, since he was arrested on that indictment. He's been in custody this entire time. So it'll be interesting to see if he's put out of custody pending sentencing. I mean, you know, Don, the jury saw a really horrific, violent video. And the jury heard emotional testimony. And the jury heard from, again, 34 witnesses on behalf of the prosecution. And the jury said he only transported people across state lines for purposes of prostitution. So the defense had started from the very beginning of this case to say, you shouldn't judge my client for his sexual proclivities or the way that he wants to live his life. You should singularly focus on the crimes for which he is being charged. And so I'm so hung up on this mixed bag of this verdict because it really signifies to me that the jury did not believe the women. They just
I'm glad
didn't
that
believe
this,
them.
attorney and very accomplished attorney that because we were having this conversation before you joined, and I basically said, the same thing, but I wonder if most or at least some of the jurors said these were consenting adults, pretty much. Right? Obviously, they did not agree with that 100%, but these were consenting adults. And why are we getting inside of this person's personal sex life, whether we think it's freaky or we wouldn't do it? But it is something that he is doing, not necessarily in the privacy of his own bedroom, but maybe the privacy of his own bedroom or the privacy of a hotel room. I'm just saying. I mean, do you think I'm wrong with that?
And then the Mann Act for the way that it was presented in this case, right, is this. Instead of him, as in Diddy, going down to Broadway and picking up a prostitute and paying the prostitute, the charge is he did that, but he did it across state lines and he was paying somebody to be able to do it, right? That's what elevated it to the federal kind of Mann Act level. Although I don't want to minimize the Mann Act either. The Mann Act has a very noble, very, very true reason. We do not want people. So some people's first introduction, frankly, to the Mann Act was courtesy of Matt Gaetz. There was an investigation into Matt Gaetz as to whether or not he was violating the Mann Act by transporting young girls to the Bahamas and other locations on private planes to be able to have sex orgies, right? Allegedly. I will emphasize allegedly. So, the Mann Act has a purpose, but again, the defense in this case was like, this is not the purpose for the Mann Act. This is not the reason why it should be prosecuted. This guy is doing these freak offs and you can't judge him for having, this is his taste. This is his style. This is what he likes to do things in the privacy of his home. I just think it's amazing because the presentation of this really squarely circled around, the abuse and the cycle of abuse and the history of the domestic violence and the use of drugs for coercion, et cetera. I mean, that was a huge linchpin of the prosecution's case. And the fact that it went on for years, that it wasn't just one moment in time, but it went on for years. And so when you look at this verdict and you see that it's unanimous, now here, listen, the jury can talk now. The gag order has now ended. So the jurors can talk. They can talk to media. They can write their books. They can do their pods. They can do everything that we all know is going to be happening in this case, right? So we're going to get some insight into what they did or did not believe. But I also am curious as to why there was a holdout on the RICO count. If they were coming back with a not guilty on the sex trafficking and they were already dead set on the transportation, on the violation of the Mann Act, I'm baffled by why they struggled with the racketeering. That one just, I mean, maybe they thought he was using his business as a criminal enterprise for purposes of the transportation. I don't know, but that was kind of weird. I'd be curious to know what was kind of stuck in their brains on that particular count.
Here's a breaking news. Sean Diddy Combs, not guilty of racketeering, not guilty of sex trafficking, transportation of prostitution, guilty. Sex trafficking by force, not guilty. Transportation of prostitution, guilty. So interesting. And look, I'm so glad to be surrounded by very accomplished and smart women. And I just want to know honestly, you can say on this channel, perhaps we could not have shared as much, Katie, a couple months or years ago when we were in traditional media. I want to know how the women right here now feel about this, and I'm just going to shut up and listen to you guys.
You know, I think there is a component that's happened with MAGA when Trump came down the escalator, and, we have grab him by the what. And there has been a desensitizing of aggression, specifically sexual aggression towards women. And, there's that famous quote from the Wall Street bros that are like, I'm so happy because we can say PUSSY again and we can use the R word again. And they're happy that they can slap their secretary on the ass again. And so we're living in a very regressive time for women, because this is what happens with civil rights movements, human rights movements. Women are advancing. Women are getting positions of power. We had a Black woman on the ticket for the president of the United States of America. And this is the backlash. This is the backlash from it. And what concerns me about this verdict is that overall, there seems to be a regressive nature about the way we're viewing sexual abuse towards women, and also victim blaming seems to be back the way it was like in the 90s when I was in high school and college. That's what I'm seeing here, and I see it with this administration. It seems to be, if you have abused a woman, welcome to our administration, Pete Hegseth. That seems to be a prerequisite. You killed a dog? Fantastic, Kristi Noem. Come on in. It seems like we are highlighting depravity, and I think that this is kind of trickling down into the collective conscience of American culture, is my gut feeling on this. Dawn, Katie, Peter, Nikki.
I'm just going to add to what was just said, which was spot on. I prosecuted these cases, and I'm going to speak very bluntly. The race of the victims made it a bigger challenge sometimes when I prosecuted these cases. There was a big cultural misconception that abuse was okay in Black communities, and that drug use was okay, and all this other stuff. And so you had to really disabuse jurors going into these cases that was not the case. And I think when you have a woman like Cassie Ventura, who had the shit beaten out of her on video that we all witnessed, and but for her filing a suit because they played that game of chicken with her and they didn't think she'd do it, and she did it to be able to get in under a statute of limitations issue, and she let the world know what he was capable of, which, by the way, some people had already seen glimpses of. She didn't have to be a part of this case. I want to be clear. I mean, look, could the prosecution have dragged her in? Yeah, but you know what? She didn't have to. Remember, this case actually started with more than just 2 victims, one of whom just said peace out and never, like, they didn't hear from the victim's attorney again. And so she didn't have to be a part of this process. And the fact that she did, pregnant, and went through all of it, I want to make sure that people understand that him getting a not guilty on that doesn't mean that he didn't do it. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. So I just think that it's really important for people to understand.
Why do you say that, Katie? I want to hear it.
Because, I mean, I'm struggling with this verdict because is this so despite Cassie Ventura and Jane saying that they didn't voluntarily want to do this, that they were being coerced, manipulated, that they were being drugged, that they were doing all of this, especially through the power and the control factor. The power part of this is really important. People need to think about this. You're with somebody who's controlling your future in every way, and somebody who also provides for you from a financial security standpoint, from a credibility standpoint, right? And you're with somebody who's doing this for you. There's more at stake than just saying, fuck it, I'm going to walk away and it's just going to make everything better. It's a challenge to be able to go and present this to a law enforcement officer. It's a challenge when you have somebody like, Sean Combs on the receiving end of the scrutiny from what your allegations are going to be. And I believe that the jury thinking, okay, so they weren't sex trafficked and they weren't a part of this, but they definitely wanted to get on those planes and they definitely wanted to go and do all of these things. It just means that they just didn't believe them, right? They didn't believe the women, and they believed, even though Sean Combs didn't testify and there wasn't other evidence presented, because in trials, remember, the witness testifies on direct examination, and what they say is the evidence on the direct examination. Cross-examination is just argument from the opposing attorney. That is not evidence. It's what the testimony is that ends up being the evidence. And so there was no defense that was put on in this case. It was just effective cross-examination by P. Diddy's lawyers to be able to exact certain concessions from the witnesses when they were testifying. So it means the jury looked at the video and said, no. It means they looked at all the pictures of all the baby oil, the lube, and all that other stuff and said, yeah, but that was totally consensual and completely a part of that lifestyle, and that was totally fine. So I'm troubled by it. I'm troubled by this.
What is the makeup of the jury again?
We had
8 men and 4 women.
12 jurors, 8 men and 4 women. So then you kind of sit there and everybody Monday morning quarterbacks on, did you have enough women? Did you have too many men? What was your racial makeup? Did you have the right balance? I mean, you're always going to go back as a lawyer and question how you did this. But right now, the big battle is, does he get out of custody while he's pending sentencing? So for sentencing purposes, he gets the entire PSI, the pre-sentence investigation report. Everything gets prepared, his prior contact with the system, et cetera. And then there's a recommendation that's made. And then the judge is going to decide what his sentence is going to end up being.
Nikki?
I completely agree with everything that Jennifer and Katie just said. I feel the same way. I'm very disturbed. This to me says that, yeah, we don't trust women anymore. I agree with you, Jennifer, that I think MAGA has played a big role in normalizing violence against women. Not that it was ever really criminalized to the degree that it should be. I do believe that MAGA, Trump, their acceptance of this has led to a cultural shift in how we approach women who have been through sexual violence or sexual assault. I do think that I can see where a lot of people in the comments and just online have been claiming that, well, Donald Trump is in the White House, so why should we prosecute Diddy? Why should we do that? And I am terrified of that logic. I hate that Donald Trump is in the White House. I hate that. He should be in jail. I hate everything about MAGA. But I do not want the argument to be, well, then let's all just say fuck it. To hell with trying to protect women because they don't do it, so why should anyone else? That scares me that we're going down that road. And it feels like we're putting ourselves, I feel like women did make some progress, yes, in this area, and I feel like we're going backwards a lot.
Yeah. Boy, are you guys paying attention to the chat? I've been looking at some of the chat here, and in the chat, it's interesting to see a lot of folks are agreeing with this, and there are people in the chat who are saying, I'm disgusted with this chat because they're agreeing with the verdict. Listen, there are a lot of folks who agree with you as well, but this is divisive. This whole issue is divisive, and I think it's going to be divisive over all of the things that we have talked about. Well, the law, did they have the right makeup and whatever, and did the law serve them well? Did the system serve them well? There's also the race thing, there's also the gender thing, and there's also the Trump thing. And honestly, I think all of those come into play at this point. Celebrity, a lot of people don't understand, being myself a survivor of assault, don't understand, sort of the victim's mentality, and they wonder, well, they're consenting adults, and to some extent that is true, but everyone doesn't react the same way. And sometimes people find themselves in positions where they find themselves frozen sometimes, or confused about exactly what to do, especially if it's someone you love and someone you trust, and they are, exhibiting certain behavior. But then
or someone with power over you.
Go ahead, Nikki.
I was gonna say that it's I think a lot of that in this case is someone who has power to greatly impact your life. There's a lot there that I think it's hard to present that, I feel like, in a trial, but that's a big aspect.
And I just want to jump in and say that this makes me incredibly sad for Black women, because if a little white girl goes missing or a little white girl is sexually assaulted, it's the main news story, it's 24/7, it's the lead story, photographs of her. If a little black girl goes missing or a little black girl falls to be a victim of sexual assault, nobody believes her, diminishes it, minimizes it, and there's a dehumanization of the victim. And in this case in particular, um, it makes me sad for Black women because I always see the mistreatment of them. And at the same time, I see how Black women stand up and fight for everybody all the time. They fight for their communities, they fight for their families. They are the backbone of this country. And it breaks my heart that these Black women were not believed and that they were abused. And I want to advocate for Black women because my life is a million times better because of the Black women in my life. And I see the disparity in how my life was already made for me before I came out of the womb with my parents and being white. And then one of my very dear friends, Starlet, her son worked for me at Jennifer Welch Designs, which is my interior design firm, for 6 years. And in October, he was shot. And so his mother and I have become incredibly close. And the disparity of our lives and the bond that I share with her and sharing the difference in what our journey has been to becoming mothers of young adults. And it's different. And this makes me sad for Black women because victims of crime that are Black women are always, just like they are in every other pillar of society, crammed down to the bottom of the totem pole. And I know Katie kind of brought that up, in your prosecutor, when you were were you a prosecutor or a defense attorney?
I know I was a prosecutor for almost half my career. Yeah.
Did you see that Black women seem to be the most minimized as victims?
Yeah, 100%. That's why I was saying when it came to jury selection, you had to really kind of be very direct about it. And you also, sadly, it always entered into the calculus of whether you were going to try to push for the plea or not. I mean, for me, that's kind of the reality that happens with these types of cases, which is why, again, there's going to be some second guessing, I think, on the jury makeup too. Were there enough women? Listen, and women can be tough on other women. Women can judge other women a lot more
Totally.
harshly. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a sexual assault or sexual abuse case that you stack the jury with only women, because some women will be the first to judge other women for what they did or did not do. And so, there's going to be a lot of kind of going back and seeing like what might have been missed here. But I am curious to see what this federal judge ends up doing in a few hours in terms of allowing him out on bond. His criminal defense attorney says that he wants to be let out on $1 million bond so he can come back to my city of Miami to be in his big fancy ass house on this big private island over here while he's pending sentencing, when frankly anybody else who was convicted of 2 counts of a federal felony would be sitting in jail until they got sentenced. So there's some injustice to that too when it comes to bond, when it comes to the Bail Process Act as well, because he lives in a big ass house down here. So I don't want anybody to be confused about that.
I changed phones and I changed cameras and audio. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
So I'm so glad that you said that, because apparently the juror that I was talking about, again, this is from reporting, this is Mona Kosar's reporting, is that there was one juror who, as you said, may be hard, on the women, or just hard in general on whether accepting, what others believe to be true, and perhaps was the holdout that. But I mean, I don't know if you would think if one person was that hard, they would just say, you know what, we're hung, we can't. So they reached a consensus altogether. You know what I'm saying, Katie, what you've been saying as well.
We talked about it last night, right? We said, Dawn, that on your show that they would go home and you'd come back and you wouldn't be surprised to see something different today. And if it was one lone holdout on that one count, then she heard something, felt something, persuaded in some way last night into this morning that made her say, I'm going to change my mind. But remember, it's 12 people reaching a unanimous verdict on 5 different counts.
And look, Katie mentioned about this gag order. I mean, it's over now. And so last night we were wondering, why are they setting these mics up in front of the courthouse? Because nobody can talk. And indeed, they did not talk last night. But now I expect that both the prosecution and the defense will come out and say something. We're going to be hearing a lot. This is just the beginning. And again, you're watching the Don Lemon Show with a group of very smart folks here who have been in tune with what's going on with this Diddy trial. And Diddy Combs found not guilty on the most serious of the charges. And so there you go. Yeah. So the court is going to adjourn until the court is adjourned while the judge considers the arguments from Mr. Combs' lawyer and prosecutors about whether he should be released. If he is released, oh my gosh, all hell is going to break loose. He may be speaking. You may see him do an interview with someone or some folks. And that is going to be media mayhem and madness, because I believe, in my experience, that he is going to, and his attorneys will spin this, and they know PR, as a win for Diddy. Do you think I'm wrong?
I think you're exactly right. I think that he's going to be surrounded by top-notch PR teams. The political climate that we're entering in right now, I mean, how many times a day do you hear the word witch hunt? How many times a day do you hear unfair prosecution? How many times a day do you hear the media is mean? For the last 10 years, you hear it all day, every day. So the psychological soil is prime for his PR team to come in and spin this in a favorable way for him. And I think those of us that are commenting on this and reporting on this need to always advocate for these victims and these victims of crimes and these Black women that are always forgotten, not believed, discarded. And I just want to say that I know for the Black women out there that see this and feel this on the foothills of Kamala Harris, a highly qualified Black woman that told the truth, that predicted all the fuckery that man has done. She predicted every bit of it. He's just done it faster. I know that you guys want to be heard. I know that you are exhausted, and I just want you to know that you ladies are not forgotten, because I am very saddened by that these women were not heard. And I think it's an ongoing theme among Black women that their voices are not heard, cherished, elevated, or believed.
That's what really stings me, Jennifer, because we had 6+, 7-ish weeks of testimony, of heart-wrenching, heartbreaking testimony from women who we know, at least in one case, we have video evidence that they were victims of horrific violence, of intimate partner abuse. We've all seen that video of Cassie in the hotel. We don't need to rewatch it. We know what was going on in that relationship. And I don't think I'm speculating here when I say I doubt that was the first time. If you get to that point where a male partner feels that he has such power over you that he can walk out into a hotel hallway and beat you and kick you in front of an elevator bay and drag you back to a hotel room, I sincerely doubt that was the first time there was violence in that relationship.
Peter,
Sorry, Don, go ahead.
Let me just say this. No. Let me just say this before we continue on here. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. That's not what he was on trial for. They were just able to
her fear. And why it does speak to her fear and why she may have felt that she did not have a choice.
Totally, I agree. I understand that. But again, that tape was not why he was on trial. They were allowed to use it, but not as, I believe, as an indication of prior bad acts. And so the law is a really tricky thing. That's why I'm not an attorney. And Jen can probably tell you, and her husband can as well. We all agree that was horrific. I believe that's what he should have been on trial for, right? Because that's a no-brainer. He is guilty of that. But, there are folks, look, in the eyes of the law, if you look at it, it's as awful as it was. O.J. Simpson was not guilty in the end, and eventually found guilty in a civil court. Perhaps that will, maybe this will happen. I'm not exactly sure if the prior thing with Cassie, if that precludes any sort of civil activity with her. because she already signed an NDA and she had as an agreement. I don't know. I'm not an attorney. But again, that's not what he was on trial for. And people are saying, hey, look, he's not guilty, set him free. And others are like, he should have been found guilty of this. And they didn't listen to women. Again, the only thing I'm saying is that it's complicated. But I want people to understand that's not honestly what he was on trial for. He has already been found guilty of that in the court of public opinion. But these other things that's what he was on trial for. And perhaps that speaks to his behavior, his bullying, and how he can coerce other people and the influence, the undue influencer that he had on other folks. Do you understand what I'm saying, Jen?
Yeah, I do understand. And I think that always these
That doesn't mean we agree with it.
No, and I think
Yeah.
I think these situations are always very complicated, and we always have to remind people that a lot of things can be true at once. A lot of conflicting things can be true at the same time. Americans are always so quick to see everything as black, white, boy, girl, guilty, not guilty. And the fact of the matter is that however this case was tried, and like you, Don, I'm not a lawyer, but these 12 jurors felt like there was reasonable doubt on these other causes. And there was doubt that seeped in of possible involvement or willingness by the ladies, and whatever that is. None of that mitigates the fact that we've all seen with our own eyes that our eyes are not lying to us, that this man battered that woman, and that is not acceptable. And these victims of this crime, I feel very badly for right now, because again, I'm going to go back to the relationships I have with these fabulous Black women in my life. Society always disappoints them. Always. And that's where my heart aches right now. And society doesn't believe them. And it just breaks my heart. And so a lot of things can be true at the same time here. Whenever we see a not guilty verdict like this, but we've seen video as to what, Peter was talking about, this horrific abuse. I agree with you, Peter. That didn't just happen randomly in a hotel hallway and it was just a one-time deal. That was the mild version because they were outside in the hallway and somebody could have opened up a door. And we all know that. We're not dumbasses here. And so it's a very complicated issue. I think celebrity factors in on this, gender, race, and these are issues that the American public wrestles with in these situations. But I want to tell you, I do know from personal experience, back to the young man that worked for me that was murdered last October. He was killed by two other Black kids, 17 and 18 years old. Javi, that worked for me, was 24. And this was the most devastating thing that ever happened to me. But there was a white woman driving the shooters around. And the white woman was babysitting two Black kids that were in the backseat of the car while these other guys shot the guy that worked for me, Javi. They tried to rob him. And this white woman is out and she's completely off. And I was so mad at the district attorney because she wasn't charged with child endangerment. And so think about this. This white woman is driving around with some Black kids. Some guys jump out of the car, shoot somebody and rob them. And she's not charged with child endangerment. And I just said to the district attorney, I know if she was Black, she would have been charged and should be behind bars. And so I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to keep talking about race, to keep talking about gender, to keep talking about law and order, and acknowledge that a couple of things can be true at the same time. And I think, obviously Diddy was an abuser and he was a sexual abuser. And I wasn't privy, I'm not privy to all the legal jargon of all of this. Some of it kind of bores me when I have to get into all the academic stuff about law. But I saw what I saw, just like you all did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Peter, I interrupted you. I'm sorry, but you understand why I wanted to jump in there because again,
I agree.
It's going to be highly fraught, right? This is going to be highly fraught and highly discussed about whether he's wrong, whether it's not, what it is, and they're going to say that's not what they were looking at. I also have someone who's a very smart, astute person, observer of the world and culture, and says, I think, as a layman, he says, I think that the jury may have had a hard time understanding exactly what Diddy was being charged with. And not that these are smart people, but it is complex, and having to consider. That was a lot of evidence to consider.
No, Don, one, I'm so glad you interrupted me because that is an important point. And two, Nikki, This conversation is reminding me of a conversation that we had about 7 weeks ago with Ariva Martin, very accomplished civil rights, where we had questioned her about trying to sit a jury in this case and how difficult a task that seemed to the two of us with a situation like this, where you have on trial a man of Diddy's esteem, of Diddy's celebrity. And you and I, Nikki, as lay people, were kind of dumbfounded. How can you possibly find an impartial panel of 12 jurors who have no biases whatsoever when it comes to this case? Because one, either you're familiar with Diddy, because he is one of the biggest music moguls in the world, or you have seen the video, which again, as Don pointed out correctly, is not necessarily pertinent to this case, but nonetheless is absolutely prejudicial. You can't watch that video and not feel a certain way about Sean Diddy Combs. And what Ariva told us, Nikki, and correct me if I'm mistaken, was that you would actually, as either a defense attorney or as a prosecutor, prefer to have someone seated on the jury who had some knowledge, some prior bias, rather than someone who had never heard of Sean Diddy Combs or had never seen the video. Because in Ariva's words, you don't want someone who is living under a rock. You don't want someone who is effectively not living in society. And I'm putting words in Ariva's mouth now. You want someone who is following the news, who is, in touch with the zeitgeist, in touch with the discourse. And now I'm reflecting on that conversation, Nikki, and I'm thinking, I wonder if things would have been different if prosecutors, if defense attorneys had sought out folks who were quote unquote living under a rock. I'm wondering if those biases may have played a role in this verdict. In Katie Fang's words, it's a very strange verdict. Guilty on 2 out of the 5 counts in a very strange fashion. Nikki, what do you think?
No, I completely agree. Apologies. I am trying to get another attorney to join us.
Peter, do you think that verdict, well, Nikki still gets her connected, do you think that the peculiarity of the verdict is they knew he did something really bad, and so they just wanted to like straddle 2 realities at the same time? There was deference to his celebrity, deference to his success, but also, I mean, when you see that video, you realize that woman, if you're being beaten like that you might not have agency anymore. You might not have agency over your consent to doing freak offs anymore if that's the consequence. And women, and Nikki can attest to this, being a woman, it makes you feel very vulnerable. Oh, I think we have a new guest. I'll let Don.
Yeah, Symone Redwine, attorney, joining us. Symone has been paying close attention to this. Symone, I called in the sense, I was like, you never know. Remember, I said, you never know with these trials. Diddy could end up getting off. He didn't quite get off, but the most serious charges as a court follower, you've been there, you're covering it. You're also a former judge. So what say you at this point?
When I heard the question yesterday about distribution, I said, oh, it's over. Oh, it's over. Yesterday, when the jury asked, if a friend asks me for substances and I give it to them, is that distribution? What I heard there is that some of the jurors are feeling like, wait a minute, that could be me. Inadvertently committing an underlying distribution offense. And when that happens, you can end up with juror nullification, where a juror simply says, I'm not going to follow this rule in this way because it's too stupid. This could be anybody. So when that happened yesterday, that also let me know they were not in agreement on RICO. And then yesterday, when at 10, I think it was 10:15 in the morning, the jurors had different areas of a transcript that they wanted. They wanted to hear about the 3 different instances of violence against Cassie. They wanted those sections. They received them at 1 p.m. And at 4 p.m., they had verdicts on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. I said, either it's going to be a straight up not guilty for all of them, because that's not enough time. I didn't feel like that was enough time to read those sections if you were going to find him guilty of S trafficking. They would have needed more time, more debate, more argument. So when I saw how quickly that was, I thought, okay. And initially, I thought that it was going to be the same verdict for all of them, but now it makes sense that it's the Mann Act, because when people asked, they said, do you think he's going to get time? I said, he'll be found guilty for something, and I think it'll be dealing with the hookers. And so here it was the Mann Act.
You did say that on this very program, and we both said something very similar.
Mhm.
And as we always say, don't be shocked. Remember, everyone, OJ is guilty. There was one recently where everyone, who did we? Oh, Johnny Depp. Remember? Oh, he's guilty, and look what happened with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I'm talking to you, Symone Redwine.
I mean, no, I'm in shock, but I'm not. I'm just very curious. What were the aspects of RICO that the jurors could not get behind? I believe that if they felt like the underlying offenses and the criteria to fit them were just too broad, too much of a slippery slope, then they likely said, well, we don't really know if we have an enterprise, or, we don't really know if who is the co-conspirators. We didn't see any co-conspirators here. They're able to then use those other elements, because the bribery, give me a break. That bribery was proven. RICO also had the underlying charge for the male escorts, right? There was no dispute that those male escorts were paid. So that says to me, the only reason they weren't getting to the RICO is they had decided, we're not going to see this as a criminal enterprise.
Symone, as the verdict was read out, the New York Times reported that Diddy smiled.
Oh, yeah.
He made quite clear that he was happy with it, and he hugged his attorneys. How close would you say to a best case scenario was this for Diddy and his attorneys?
Excellent under these facts. Like I said, there was no way for him to get out of the prostitution charge. That was just too obvious. So this, as far as I'm concerned, was best case, because he also has a very reasonable judge who has already indicated that there's a good chance he may get time served.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Go on.
Wow.
Talk about that,
Okay.
please.
All right. Y'all ready
Yeah.
for the legal tea? Get your
Yeah.
little
Yes,
tea
we're ready.
glass.
We're ready. Go
Here's the
ahead,
legal
tell us.
tea. So generally, when you're convicted of a federal crime, most of the time you just go start serving your time. Here, though, immediately the defense said, hey, we want to put up $1 million bond. Let him go today. The government said, no, Your Honor, we are seeking 20 years. The judge says, for the Mann Act, the judge says, show me a case where someone did not receive bond for the Mann Act. I'll wait. And that's how the judge is. In other words, the judge is saying, you're being unreasonable here, lady, to make this man, after he's, been incarcerated since last September. So the fact that the judge was willing to let him go after being found guilty, let him go home, put up $1 million bond, go to Miami or whatever, and then come back for sentencing, it indicates it could be time served, and it's probably not going to be anything substantial. Otherwise, he'd be more likely to say, no, continue sitting here serving, and that's just going to go towards whatever your final time will be.
Damn. That is some tea, girl. I mean, that is some tea. I mean, that's like, I hadn't thought about that yet, because your brain's always like wired to, let's get to the sentencing. I'm Jennifer with I've Had It, by the way. Nice to meet you, Symone.
Oh, girl, I love you. I'm
I
your
love
legal
you.
bestie. I'm attorney Symone.
Aw.
Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. But I didn't even think about that. And when you said that, my jaw dropped, and I bet you're 1,000,000% correct. He never goes back to jail.
You don't think he goes back
No.
to jail? You don't think he goes
No.
back at all?
That's what she's saying.
And so now what then? What about appeals, etc.?
He might get time served. I mean, a house arrest in one of those mansions or something. But as far as appeals, there's nothing to appeal. What would he appeal for? Because there's a chance he could get a new trial and it'd be worse. I wouldn't, if I were on his legal team. I mean, he's Diddy. He can walk around with the Mann Act, 2 Mann Act charges. It's not going to prevent him from playing in parks with his kids. He's not going to have to register as a sex offender. So I think he'll be all right.
So when you say that he would be under house arrest, is that like you have the bracelet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. He may get something like that
I
for
think you're
the
right,
balance of the
Simone.
sentence.
I didn't even think about it, but when you said
Mhm.
that, I think you're right. I don't think he goes back.
Mm-mm. Oh, and and the defense is going to come up with this package of a sentencing, that they want to propose where it's going to be rehab and he's going to have, someone come to his house and I don't know, hot yoga and, crystals and all. Because remember, when they were trying to deal with the bail situation, they had proposed he'd hire an armed guard. The armed guard would be there. He wouldn't have internet throughout his entire mansion. They are going to put it all on the line so that man doesn't have to go back to a cell.
Yeah. Monique Presley is joining us, legal mind and legal commentator here. Monique, you've been watching. What's it, shocking, surprised, or just as you had thought?
Not just as I thought, as I told anybody who would listen. It was an overcharged case from the very beginning. It was over prosecuted. It was not just ambitious. It was unwise. And I appeared, quite a few times on Laura's show talking about this. And from the very first night, I said, RICO is hard to prove under normal circumstances. But when you're doing RICO, like throw everything at it against the wall, including the kitchen sink, and then hoping you can put it all together into something that starts looking like an enterprise. No, I would argue this case is not even about Sean Combs. I'm a career criminal defense minded person, and I don't want this type of case to happen to anyone. Because there are actions that should be charged and prosecuted, Don. Domestic violence should be charged the fullest extent of the law. And please find your way, the quickest way to get that defendant under the jail. Prostitution, as long as it is on the books, is a crime where sex workers can be prosecuted. People have their feelings about that, and the people who pay them can be prosecuted. People have opinions about that in our society. But if it's on the books, charge it. But they took a DV case that they couldn't charge and a prostitution case that they could, and threw in, oh, the man has a lot of money, and thought that the jury would be persuaded, and they were not.
Stand by, Monique. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining. I know that you've got to run and you have other things. You deal with your own show. Jen, thank you so much for helping out here.
Thank you, Lemonheads.
Thank you, Jen. We'll see you. Thanks so much.
Nice to
by the way,
meet you.
Jen was filling in because I am on vacation, but I had to step in front of the camera and step away from vacation to talk about this. And joining us now, Symone Redwine, attorney, legal journalist and commentator. Monique Presley joining us as well as the rest of the Don Lemon team. Monique now saying, as someone who knows about this, a career legal-minded person, criminal defense-minded person, you said overcharged, not surprised at all about this verdict. Are you surprised that, well, even the guilty charges, are you surprised that those were that they were able to reach a guilty verdict on those?
No. I mean, I thought, and I said that too, I thought that there was enough there. And sometimes what you end up having happen, I don't know what's going on with this jury, but sometimes because of the level of just heinous behavior that went before this jury, I mean, there's nobody who can look at that video and have some manner of humanity. The video of the abuse of Miss Ventura, and not be sickened. And so you sometimes end up with a jury saying, what can we say yes to? Yes. What is there enough for? But they'll be real clear on what they maybe wish they could say yes to, but they cannot. And I think that's what was going on with those early notes. I knew the way this was headed the minute they said there was a juror who wasn't listening. I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah. I'm like, there's at least one person in there who's saying no, hell no, damn no. Yeah. But it turns out that even I mean, this was some good lawyering by these defense attorneys, because I don't like Allen charges. I don't like sending juries back and saying keep at it, but they must have known that this was headed their way.
That Allen charge is very controversial. You both know that because they believe in, is it coercion or is it browbeating? Is it bullying? Why it's so controversial? Trying to make other people persuade, coerce other folks to come over to your side when they've made up their mind and they're standing on business. And right, is that
right? And it's that particular language. And I haven't been following closely. I don't think that that's the charge that happened. I mean, we've filed over my career any number of appeals where judges were insistent upon giving that, because it's one thing to say keep working. It's another thing when you give that language. And what you think about is not knowing the makeup of who is in there, and you want jurors to stand by their closely held convictions and beliefs when they are deliberating. And when you start saying, try to reach a verdict, come to an agreement, and when you start trying to re-explain the burden, no, then I feel like you're messing with my jury. And I start wanting to stand on my head. That's when it gets bad. But saying keep working, come back for another breakfast. Think it through.
Yeah. What would you have advised?
And that obviously worked because these jurors came in and they wanted to go home.
Yeah. Symone, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So my prediction was that so people thought, oh, we talked about it here. I said, you asked, well, will they get, have something same day? And I said, no, I don't think so, because the instructions will be so long. But then sure, I also predicted that they're going to come back first week and say hung jury. And I knew that because they were trying to get the heck up out of there. So being this close to the holiday really worked for the defense, because they probably moved faster than they would have if we weren't rolling up on this holiday weekend where they've already, been together for 5 weeks. So I think this was exactly what we were expecting. I wasn't sure, which way it would go, but certainly wasn't surprised when they said they were hung.
You weren't surprised. Look, we're looking outside of the courthouse now, and at these microphones, the gag order is up, correct? How soon before court start coming out?
Ooh. I want to hear from some jurors, but you said how soon before? Who can talk? The
before
attorneys?
They step up to these microphones. Yeah.
Well, actually, what they're waiting on right now is at 1 p.m. There's going to be a hearing on whether or not Diddy can make bail. So they're probably going to wait till the end of the day to make any major statements. They got this momentum and they don't want to mess it up. So now what we're waiting to see is, will he grant Diddy bail? They said there is a plane waiting for him right now to come and pick him up. So is he going to get on that jet today? Or is he going to have to go back into that cell?
Why would he not? I mean, if you think about it, how long has he been in jail now for it to be some damn near misdemeanor charges ultimately that he's been found guilty of?
Totally agree.
It was always a stretch, and that is why I'm saying SDNY's reputation should take a hit for this. Prosecutors have millions at their disposal to prosecute all kinds of cases for people who have the right for the state to stand up for them, and to choose with their discretion to use those resources in this manner and then assert the things that they asserted in order to not just bring these charges, but to bind this defendant over this entire time, and then for all of it to flop. Mm-hmm. No, that man's walking out today.
There's an interesting question in there, and because listen, earlier, we talked about the video, and everyone says, "Oh my gosh, he's got to be guilty." That's not what he was on trial for beating Cassie in the video, although it was used in the case. But there is Lashandra Chanel asks in the comments, and Monica, you're perfectly capable of answering this question. It doesn't matter whether you believe or not. It's what was presented, and you can explain as a legal person. It says, Monique, do you believe the women? I'm sure Monique believes.
I don't think, at least where Miss Ventura is concerned, it's not up to whether we believe or not. It's a fact. What she said, I think the bulk of what she said happened. There was verifiable proof. It's not like she told the jury that he beat her in an elevator shaft and they couldn't see that happened. And I'm not the type of person to think, oh, and that was just that one isolated time or occasion. No, but I think what happened with this jury is that they believed the entirety of her testimony. They believed her when she said she did it because she loved him. They believed her when she said she started another relationship and what was free to be in the other relationship and then came back. They believed that there was a very complicated, obviously domestic abuse ridden situation happening with those two people over the span of some years. What they maybe did not believe, but again, this is the prosecution's fault. This isn't Ms. Ventura's fault. They might not have believed the coercive nature was such that she did not have independent decision making. So that's where trafficking, that's where kidnapping, that's where all those things are going to fall apart. And the prosecutor tried to put on the stand a person who had never evaluated Ms. Ventura, never spoke with her. I mean, all of these things are just things that if it wasn't this type of high profile case, I firmly believe it doesn't make it through the door at all.
Well,
Like,
I firmly believe if that CNN video had not come out, if that had not been leaked, we wouldn't be here. That video is what created the public concern, the outcry, and where people said, oh gosh, Diddy's been getting away with committing crimes for decades. Enough is enough. Without that video, there would have never been this trial. But also, I just want to say, as a testament to the attorneys there, great job on the legal defense side. The prosecution, I'll say they were very organized. But I'm just going to go there, Dawn. I got to tell the truth. This is what it looks like in the law when you don't have DEI. When you have a monolith. Each of the women that were on the prosecution, first of all, they were all women. They were all Caucasian. It's my understanding based on my research, they grew up in privileged lives and have lived the majority of their lives in privilege. They could not relate to the jury, and you could tell. And when I thought about it, I was like, there were just certain arguments. There's no way in hell I would be on a legal team trying to argue that, oh yeah, Cassie was sex trafficked and beat down like this. And then Jane was trafficked by not getting her $10,000 a month rent. Girl, bye. I feel like if they had people on the legal team for the prosecution that better mirrored the jury the way that Diddy did, they would have been able to speak to them and told a better story. Because in the end, the prosecution simply did not tell a more persuasive story.
And they might have been, I watch you all the time, Dawn, and I know you talked a lot about not judging people's lifestyles, what somebody's particular kink is or what their freak is or what their thing is. And then some of this to many is just beyond the pale, but you never have any idea who's in your jury. And so if you have a particular set of sensibilities, you really have to be tapped in to understand, and don't make any assumptions. Don't think that the 50-something-year-old wealthy white architect or engineer isn't the main one that most identifies with the defendant.
Good point. Yeah,
depending on the way they're living their life. And I think that's the way it came back with that one juror, because way back when they were having to remove a juror, I'm like, that doesn't matter. Y'all, this is not black and white. When you start dealing with privilege and with a lot of money and with what goes on in people's bedrooms, it crosses all kinds of lines, because it's everybody from the poor, white, rural man living in a trailer home to the wealthy, rich, black woman who regularly pays for sex. There's a line, and the line ain't color. So,
but also when I saw that there was not one male on the legal team, that struck me, because SDNY there's probably more male attorneys than female. So I thought that was odd. And then once, I'm in that courtroom listening to the facts every day, about halfway through, I said, I see why there's no man on here. I see why there's not a black lady. I see why there's not a black man. I wouldn't have touched that thing. I would have told him in the back, y'all sure you want to do this? Like, why don't we work on crafting different charges, or like the forced labor. The forced labor, child, what, girl? That one was a hard one because that was the young lady who claimed that she was SA'd by Diddy and continued to work for him. But just the charges themselves, forced labor is not something that the average juror has any idea what it is or has ever come across. So it needs to be something very clear cut. Like, you know, when you have those massage parlors where they lock the ladies in the back and you have to live there and do nasty stuff to the people you massage, like that type of forced labor. But what we saw, those charges were difficult. And then you've also got, initially I thought, oh, the tampering with witness charge would be a simple charge under the RICO, because I thought it applied to the hotel workers that he paid with the bribes. No, the tampering with witnesses was gosh darn Mia and Jane, his girlfriend, where he calls her on the phone and he tries to get her to, you know, say nice things about him. Give me a break. I think just from the inception, I think that the legal team for the prosecution are highly intelligent, brilliant women. They know the law, but perhaps they're not as keen on being able to relate to what a jury that we had there, what an average SDNY jury would find reasonable and could relate to.
So you think that the prosecution from the very beginning, I hate to say shot themselves in the foot, but you know what I'm saying, just from the makeup of their own jury, so to speak, of their own team, and not understanding the culture and sensibilities from a group of, they needed more diversity.
They needed more diversity of experience. Like, even if some of them were poor or whatever. Let me give you one quick example. With Capricorn Clark, she got on that stand. Multiple witnesses actually got on the stand and cried. And there were times when they cried, and I was like, I want to cry too. What are you crying for? I don't understand. Because there was no buildup of the story. But Capricorn Clark, she got on that stand and she's opened up. She talked about how she was an orphan. Both of her parents died straight out of high school. Then fast forward, she's working for Diddy, the things that happened to her. And then it goes into talking about how basically, even after the kidnapping, she continued to want to work for him. She reached back out to Diddy periodically throughout her career to do so. And they were like, if he was so bad, why would you do that? I was like, girl, let's talk about how you grew up in the projects, how in between your jobs, you got blackballed. You couldn't work for anyone else. You know, you have a special needs son. Tell us the story, because a jury might be better able to understand why you go back to this horrible boss that you say you have, if you have no other options because he's blackballed you, you know, throughout the music industry, as opposed to there being just an assumption that, oh, well, the law says if someone says, I'll make sure you never work in this town again, that that's sufficient for a forced labor charge, etc. Mm-hmm. They really needed to build up the story in persuasive ways. Mark Agnifilo, however you say his name, did an amazing job of that.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm so happy that both of you are here. Please stay as long as possible. But I want to bring in now Glenn Kirshner, who's an American attorney, the former U.S. Army prosecutor and a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Office of the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, and a former NBC, MSNBC analyst. And I believe you're with Midas now. Are you with Ben now? You do stuff with Ben? No. Independent. You're muted, by the way, Glenn. You're muted, by the way. Glenn, you are muted.
There we go. Yeah, I can't even spell IT. That's how bad I am. No, but to answer your question, Don, I'm not with Midas. I'm 100% independent, but I also do the legal breakdown every day with Brian Tyler Cohen.
Okay, so that's right, with Brian, our friend Brian. So you're paying attention to what's been going on in the Diddy case. Are you surprised that you've been on the inside? Yeah. You know, you've been the prosecutor many times. Did the prosecution didn't make its case? What do you think?
Not surprised at all. I tried lengthy RICO trials in the courts of Washington, D.C. I did a 6-month RICO trial in front of Judge Lambert, a 3-month RICO trial in front of Judge Hogan. I've seen it all. I've experienced it all. I've lost a whole lot of cases in my lifetime. I've won some as well. What doesn't surprise me, though, Don, is a split verdict. And here's why. There are two most frequent reasons for a split verdict, and we get them every day. Don, I would bring a 3-count case, a 3-charge case in a murder case. And, you know, I might try it for a week or two, and I might win 1 conviction, but 2 of the charges, they find the defendant not guilty. It's not unusual for 2 reasons. 1, Prosecutors will bring as many charges as they can, believing that they have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But guess what? The jury doesn't always see it that way. So they may convict somebody on counts 1, 2, and 3, but find them not guilty on counts 4, 5, and 6. That happens every day in courthouses all around the country. There is a second sort of almost more common occurrence. Juries will reach what we call compromise verdicts. They will start deliberating, and Don, they will disagree about damn near anything, including what to order for lunch. Never mind whether evidence proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And people, I think, in my experience as a 30-year trial court prosecutor, people are often uncomfortable pronouncing guilt on others. You are guilty. I didn't even use the word guilty in my closing arguments. I always said, you know what, folks, we've presented the evidence. We're just asking that you hold the defendant accountable for what he decided to do, violate the law. I didn't even use the word guilty. I think it makes people a little uncomfortable. So jurors will start to negotiate with one another. A little bit of horse trading. You know what? All right, I'm not really persuaded, but we will find him guilty on counts 1 and 2, but we'll find him not guilty on counts 3 through 5. And here is the
You're getting
thing.
a lot of shaking heads from legal minds and attorneys on this panel.
And I'm
Glenn.
thrilled to be on with them. I appreciate it. And if I get something wrong or you disagree, please push back. I love that. And here's the thing. This, people may not know this. This may not be intuitive. There is something called the veil of secrecy that surrounds jury deliberations. And jurors can go back and they can reach verdicts for what we would consider to be the wrong reasons, like negotiating a verdict because the 4th of July is coming up and we don't want to come back to that deliberation room. We want to get our beach on. And the law says you're not permitted to pierce the veil of secrecy surrounding jury deliberations to figure out why they reached a particular verdict. There is one most common exception to that, and that is outside influence. If somebody influences a juror improperly, or if a juror brings evidence into the deliberation room that was not introduced during the course of the trial, man, that's a mistrial probably 10 times out of 10. But those are the very limited exceptions where you can actually look into deliberations and figure out why in the world they reached what seemed to be inconsistent verdicts. Inconsistent verdicts, the appeals courts have said, are just fine. They're lawful, and it doesn't give rise to an attack on appeal. And listen, Diddy was convicted of 2 felony counts, right, in violation of what's called the Mann Act, transporting people for purposes of prostitution. The statutory max is 10 years per count, so 20 years. Now, we know that the voluntary sentencing guidelines in the federal courts will bring in the range of confinement much below 20 years. But here's the other thing to keep your eye on. There's something called relevant conduct. And even if you're not convicted of something, the government can say, listen, judge, we think the evidence demonstrates proof by a preponderance of the evidence that he committed other acts of misconduct. And we want to use that. We're arguing that should ratchet up his maximum, his punishment. So there's a lot at play here, but all of this is frankly entirely routine, but it seems a little alarming when we see these kind of inexplicable or inconsistent verdicts.
And Glenn, that's actually exactly what the government said that they want to do. Today at 1 p.m., they're going to have a hearing. She is actually, Comey is stating that she's going to be seeking 20 years, which is 10 for each count stacked on top of each other. And that she's also going to be presenting some additional, bad acts that he has done, including, she said that just before he was arrested, he assaulted Jane another time and also had drugs and so forth in the hotel rooms, and therefore is saying he hasn't learned his lesson. So we'll see at 1 p.m. how much of that, kind of comes to light.
Yeah. I mean, we all saw the assault on tape. And even though the assault was not technically a charge in the case, I don't think the sentencing judge is going to turn a blind eye to that.
It wasn't technically charged. It wasn't not technically a charge. It just is not charged.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that the sentencing judge is going to understand that. So I'm kind of leaning toward the defense's ability to make some cogent arguments to the court about the time that this defendant has already spent behind bars, about the manner in which this case was prosecuted, and about the relative success or lack thereof when there was a jury that could have found so much more than they did. So I do think that the prosecution is in less of a good position today than yesterday to go to the judge and say, but look, see, there are these other things. Well, you
could have charged it.
You took your shot.
Yeah, and the judges, those are great arguments, stock and trade arguments. We hear them every day. People should also know pretrial detention, he will get day for day credit. So whatever time he has served will be subtracted from the time he ultimately is required to serve when the judge passes sentence.
Before you guys joined us, Symone Redwine made a very interesting assessment, Symone, about time served and whether he would spend any more time behind bars. Will you tell the group of legal minds we have here? And I want to know what they think.
So in today's
and Monique,
hearing,
please check your text messages. Thank you.
Oh yeah, go for it. So in today's hearing, the judge was very open to granting bond, and the government was adamant against it. The government specifically said, no, we're asking that he, remain in custody. We're seeking 20 years. Diddy's team said, well, we're going to put up $1 million bond, and we're asking for him to be released today. The government's response was, Ms. Comey, please provide me with a case where someone was denied bail for the Mann Act. And she kind of stuttered. She's like, well, I know of some involving minors, but I'll just need some time and I'll get you something. He said, yeah, get it to me by 1 p.m. So he's going to consider it. That gave me the impression that he seems to very much see this as prostitution, as minor, as something where absolutely bail should be granted. And therefore, he's probably going to be leaning to the much lower side of sentencing and may even give time served. He seems comfortable with allowing, Diddy to go home.
If I can respond, Don, I would find it pretty remarkable if the judge, because what happens is once a jury has reached guilty verdicts, the playing field shifts and the burden of proof shifts with respect to questions of continued detention. Generally, when somebody is convicted, particularly of crimes that carry up to 20 years in prison, and if they have been deemed a flight risk or danger to the community such that they were ordered detained pending trial, it is almost a certainty, but certainly not, that a detention will continue through the date of sentencing. But really interesting questions posed by the judge. One, it sounds like it's a really important and relevant question as to whether, detention was ever ordered in cases where there have been 2 violations of the Mann Act. But here's what I'll say to kind of push back against that. Sentencing determinations and detention determinations pending sentencing are so intensely personal and fact specific to the case, to the defendant, to the victims, and the harm they have suffered at the hands of Diddy, as found now by a jury, that there really is no actual precedential value in the argument that, well, no other Mann Act case has seen the defendant detained pending sentencing. I think that's an important atmospheric argument. I do not think it's a particularly persuasive legal or precedential argument.
Right, but the Mann Act, I'm taking over for Don just for a minute. He'll be right back. I just want to ask you, who are the victims for the Mann Act that the judge is going to be assessing the extent of harm?
Well, here's where you got me, because I have not followed the details day in and day out of the evidence that was presented. Here's what I will say. We often have cases with victims in any number of prostitution type offenses, right? And often they don't perceive themselves as victims, even though the law does. And frankly, we protect people who can't or won't protect themselves, including minors who are being trafficked, including prostitutes, because we know, it's not that different from the domestic violence arena, where I had DV murder cases where we tried to protect the victim, but the victim kept saying, you know what? I'm going back to the abuser because he apologized and said he loves me. He ain't going to do it again. Sometimes we had to take up for those victims when they either didn't perceive themselves as victims or they were unwilling to do what was necessary to hold the perpetrator accountable. I see a parallel
Right, but
when
I
it comes
think,
to
but
prostitution
Symone,
cases.
I mean, I know we don't have any allegations that there's children involved here. So let's just be clear for everybody who's watching. And the Mann Act is not for DV. The Mann Act is for prostitution. Symone, from you being in there, it's the men who were crossing state lines who were paid for sex acts, right?
I thought it was the men initially, but for these 2 counts he was found guilty of, it's just Jane and Cassie. It's his
Oh.
grown-up girlfriends.
Okay. Well, and so I think that that's going to be, to me, a more interesting argument. And I guess the reason why they couldn't do the men also, or they didn't pick them, is because there apparently wasn't any evidence that came in trial that there was a crossing of state lines.
No, there was, but here's what's weird. Under the men were charged as one of the predicates under RICO. The men were evidence of the predicate charge that was under RICO. But then separately, as separate individual counts, were Cassie and Jane. Mann Act, Cassie and Jane.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to end up seeing what happened. I have a question for the former prosecutor, because this is what I've been asking the whole time, asking myself, and I've only defended, I haven't prosecuted, so I can't think, and I can't think prosecutor. Would you have charged the RICO in this case? Or was this an overcharge? Because to me, it's looked like an overcharge from day one that I thought was because the DV, was statutorily limited, and they didn't have a shot on what to me would have been a very solid, winnable case. And then where other of the charges were concerned, it seemed that they were not going to be able to make the gun charges stick because they, it seems like the better case fell apart to me. And they
Absolutely
went with this case, but if you see it differently, explain.
Yeah, so I can only talk about my experiences in making decisions whether to pursue RICO charges or not. Maybe just a simple conspiracy charge where you don't have to prove there was an enterprise. There were established roles by the conspirators. There were, there was a pattern of racketeering activity which is required to be proved in a RICO case. It's a really fancy way to say you got to prove 2 crimes that are enumerated in the racketeering statute. So there's so much that goes into that question. And just as you said, you never prosecuted, I never defended. I kind of, I wear my government blinders with pride, and I followed the rules and did things a certain way. I was not the kind of creative outside the box thinker that my dear friends, lifelong friends in the defense bar are. And I don't say that to pander. I always said, just let me be on my high horse for 30 seconds here. I always said that defense attorneys have the much more difficult job than prosecutors. Why? Because one, it's thankless, because the perception is, oh, y'all are just trying to spring bad guys back out into the community. No, what defense attorneys are trying to do is, represent the rights of somebody who's been charged by the United States of America with a crime. And, when you look at that caption, United States of America versus John Jones, that doesn't sound like a fair fight to me. So if ever, the importance of defense counsel were sort of at the zenith, it's in criminal prosecutions. But the other thing that you all have to do, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, is you have to guard against governmental misconduct, police abuse, prosecutorial misconduct, or overreach. Y'all are doing double duty where prosecutors are just doing one thing, presenting the evidence and trying to hold folk accountable for their crime. So all props to my brother and sister defense attorneys across the bar. Now, here's the thing about charging a RICO case. If you don't have to, don't do it, because you're going to be playing against yourself. If you have a strong substantive crime, let's assume I have 3 murders, and I think those 3 murders were part of a RICO conspiracy, but the evidence on the murders is strong. But guess what? The evidence that there was an enterprise and recurring roles by members of the criminal organization and a pattern of racketeering acts that I could prove, which you need to prove, it's an element of proving a RICO conspiracy. If the evidence of that is weak, don't do it. Don't play against yourself. Don't give the jurors something to hang up on or disagree about. Go with your 1 or 2 or 3 strongest charges that you believe strongly you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And don't give the jurors things to discuss and debate and disagree about. So that's kind of my umbrella approach and answer, but I don't know specifically all the evidence in the Diddy case.
Let me jump in here real quick, and I want to just, Symone, you're still with us, right?
Yeah.
Symone, I want to ask you that we are looking, by the way, Cassie Ventura's attorney has spoken, and we're outside of the courtroom now. They're testing those microphones. They're getting ready. There will be people. Monique, you know this. Symone, you know this. Glenn, you know this. They're going to be doing some talking as soon as they can, because they want to shape whatever reality is that people are going to believe moving forward. And you can better believe Diddy still has his fortune. I'm sure the attorney's fees were astronomical, but he can afford some great PR people, a lot of folks who can be out there who are going to shape the narrative in his favor, as with any citizen. He is do that right. But Cassie Ventura's attorney has spoken out, and we're going to try to get that up for you. What do you think? Obviously disappointed, I'm sure, but go on, Symone, before we figure other things out here.
I'll say this, to be perfectly honest, under the law, under the crimes there, at the end of the day, a component of it is there are a lot of people who felt like Diddy got away with crimes for years, and this was his time to be held accountable. But the truth of the matter is the underlying offenses were offenses where, as Monique said, the statute of limitations had passed. So truly, under the law, I'm comfortable with the decision, particularly surrounding RICO, because there is a huge slippery slope there. I felt like the sexual offenses, the forced labor, some of those offenses that were all just kind of tied together there. It was tied together to find a way to get justice for Cassie and others where the statute of limitations had expired. That's frightening. Also, the idea, for example, that they are charging him with, substance distribution to get there and things like that, when he was partying with friends in the industry, or the fact that it was supposed to be trafficking of Jane based on fraud because he didn't spend enough quality time with her, before freak-offs. So I think overall, while I think a number of people would have liked to see him serve some time, primarily because they know he's done such bad things to Cassie and others, I don't have a problem with this from the justice perspective. He hired those hookers. I'm sorry. He did the Mann Act. He transported the women across state lines. He's getting charged there. And it seems like justice has been served, and that Cassie at least was financially made whole.
Attorney Symone Redwine, who's been following this very closely. Symone, thank you very much. We really appreciate you joining us here today on the Don Lemon Show, the Don Lemon channel. This is supposed to be hot topics. You don't get any hotter than this topic.
Thank you so much. You take care.
Hop back on if you can, but thank you so much. Look, and also join the great Glenn Kirshner, who is here now, and also Monique Presley, who is a contributor and a friend of the show and a personal friend as well. And she has been right on about this from the very beginning. We spoke early on about this. And Monique, I'm not going to say I told you so, but as we have been saying, you never know in these cases. I've been saying from the very beginning, you never know. Everyone's like, he's guilty, he's guilty, he's guilty. I'm like, I don't know. Before you guys came on, though, we talked about, the makeup of the jury, and we talked about all the nuances that, that can, for the reasons that whatever verdict they to a conclusion about. But I'm wondering how much race is going to play into this, because it always does. And because we had folks in the chat going, why should Diddy be guilty? And why isn't Donald Trump guilty? And Diddy can be guilty. And they're going after a black man, but the white man gets away, figure of speech, with murder. Monique?
Yeah. So people who follow me at all know my thoughts on this. I don't know how much I would say it applies where this verdict is concerned, because once you're in court, you're in court. And people break all kinds of laws, and some get prosecuted for them and some don't. And that is where I talk, as I just did a few minutes ago, about the broad discretion, the powerful arm of the prosecutor, and what they choose to do with that power and with those resources that, remember, belong to the government, belong to the state. So as somebody who's been associated with a number of high profile cases, including as lead counsel and spokesperson for Dr. Bill Cosby, I will say I have no doubt that Black men with means in this country are targeted for prosecution, as are Black men without means in this country. The record is clear. The disproportionate nature and number of charges that are brought against Black men, they are more frequently stopped, frisked, searched, jailed, beaten, killed, convicted, falsely convicted to the tune of 12,000 or more a year, according to the latest statistics. And so I tell people all the time, though I'm not in the business of trying to save one Black man at a time as a lawyer anymore, I still tell people when I teach and when I talk, especially Black men with money, I probably texted you this a few times, Don, don't even jaywalk. Don't do it, friend, because you jaywalk and they coming to get you. You know, I mean, your counterpart, your white counterpart with the same socioeconomic status, the same everything else, I would argue, would have a better shot in this country. Those are the facts. And so when I see a prosecution like this, it's not that Sean Combs didn't do horrible things. We know he did. We saw he did. Those things deserved to be punished. The issue for me, especially when I see cases like this, is that prosecutors are not supposed to be with one trial sending a message out to the world. There's actually, as my colleague on here knows, you know, there's language against that. That's a big bad boo if they tried to say for you to do that with your verdict. So people who were saying, you charge this one powerful man and it sends a message. This message does not reach Southern Alabama. This message does not reach Upper Maine. That's not what happens when you try this one person with a whole bunch of money. People who are beating their wives every day in the privacy of their own homes aren't afraid of being found out because of this one glossy $1 prosecution. What I want to see prosecutors do is go after people who are doing this to their partners, men and women, every day. And if what this case is saying is true, well, now we know the jury didn't buy it. But to me, there are people all across America who would be at danger of a RICO charge for the way that they're conducting themselves with their spouses and with their intimate partners, if this is what a RICO case is. So yes, I do believe race stayed in. Race is a factor, but I do not believe that race was a factor in this verdict, at least from what I have followed of the trial. Once they were in the courtroom, it seems like this jury did their best to apply the law and came up with a right decision.
Monique, I just want you to weigh in on something for me, please, and I want to get a woman's perspective on this. This is Cassie's attorney, Douglas Wigdor. Here it is.
We're pleased that he's been held responsible for something, which is something that hasn't happened in his lifetime. And, we're hopeful that ultimately he receives a substantial sentence for what he's done. And, we're pleased that Cassie's brought to light everything that has happened in this trial. I just spoke with her and with the U.S. Attorney's Office team. And she's in a good place. She's pleased that, again, that the jury has found him liable, or guilty of 2 federal crimes.
Monique?
Yeah, I think that Miss Ventura did something brave and something that was at great personal cost to her. And to me, it seemed something that she did not have to do. I mean, she had already had significant settlement. We knew about one of them, but there were 2. So in terms of financial wherewithal and reasons to go forward, it certainly was not that. And from her testimony, she didn't try to make it all one thing. She said the good, the bad, the ugly of it. She included all of it. She was candid about her feelings, her real feelings about why she stayed involved with a man who would treat her in that way. And there are people who do understand that and people who don't. I hope that there is a broader conversation about that because of what she did. And the fact that there was a conviction of some sort, I hope does bring her some comfort.
The great Monique Presley, who is, I mean, you are I don't want to be offensive, a jack of all trades, a lady of all trades, because she's going to report on the big ugly bill, She's been working with that. We texted the other night, and Monique, I am. It was in the middle of the night when you texted. I'm sure you understand because I'm actually away. But you can text me in the middle of the night as much as you want. But I just wanted you to know what happened. So Monique, thank you so much. I know that you have to get to this.
I apologize, but Don, we're covering State of the People is covering this action on the bill all day, and just non-shameless plug. There are big things that are being decided today on the Hill that affect millions of people's lives, not just this one man with means who at the end of the day is going to be okay. So I would ask everybody to please, of course, watch Don's coverage because he's covering it every single day, and lean in.
Yeah, I was going to ask you for your final thoughts, but those might be your final thoughts on this and other things that's going on in the world. Monique Presley, thank you. I appreciate you so much. Take care. Thank you, Monique Presley. I'm joined now by Glenn Kirshner. Glenn, you're a prosecutor here. So what's happening now as we continue to look at what's going on downtown in Manhattan? What is the prosecution doing now? What is going on? Take us behind the scenes in this courthouse.
So it sounds like now the prosecution will have to marshal its best arguments for continued detention pending sentencing, which is, the norm. But and then there will be a sentencing date set. The case will be referred for an investigation. A pre-sentence report will be generated. And I'll tell you, that can be a 25, 30, 40, 50 page document that will go into the history of who the defendant is. Both the good and the bad victims will be interviewed. People who are in the defendant's corner will be interviewed. And it is a really remarkable and inclusive report that then goes to the judge. And it's supposed to inform the judge's decision on sentencing. That's something that usually takes 6 to 8 weeks to produce. So it sounds like the only decision we're going to get immediately today, unless the judge takes it under advisement for a day or two, is whether Diddy will continue to be detained pending sentencing. This old prosecutor finds it hard to believe that he wouldn't be, but I was really interested in your guests' information and observations. And, maybe the judge won't be convinced that these Mann Act violations warrant continued detention or punishment beyond what he has already served in pretrial detention. But those are the immediate next steps I think we're looking for.
You think that he will have to stay?
I would be making that argument as a prosecutor. Certainly the crimes of conviction. I mean, he is now facing up to 20 years in prison, right? Recognizing the voluntary sentencing guidelines will come in lower than that. And, you can't ignore, and I heard one of your guests say, there are allegations that he continued to engage in misconduct even after he was indicted in this case. And you can't ignore some of the violent conduct that we all saw on that video. So, the question becomes, can he prove that he really, because the calculation shifts once a jury has entered a guilty verdict. It's no longer the government's burden to prove he's a flight risk or a danger to the community. It shifts, and now he has to prove that he should be released pending sentencing. So I don't know. I'm not going to say it's a coin toss, but it's obviously a viable question. And both the prosecutors and the defense, I'm sure, are marshaling their best arguments. I think I heard you say they're going to be back in court at 1 p.m. to take on this issue.
Yeah. And are you surprised by the level of activity outside of this courthouse?
No, I mean, celebrity trials, high profile trials will attract lots and lots of attention. And, I don't want to go back to where you were in the previous segment about, how race impacts all of this. And I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but I tried cases in both federal court and local court in DC for decades. And, race permeated so much of what goes on inside of courthouses, particularly in Washington, DC, and other cities around the country. And, we've done a pretty lousy job, I think, addressing discrimination of the past. Yes, we have the Batson case where the Supreme Court said prosecutors can't strike people based on their race. You can't try to systematically exclude jurors because they happen to be of the same race, and they've extended it to gender of the defendant. But that's like a Band-Aid on a gaping chest wound when it comes to the racial discrimination that we've seen inside the system forever, for as long as the system has been around. But I would add a layer on top of that. It's not just race, but it's class, right? Because here's what really burns me up, Don. And I fought against it from the inside. I'm fighting against it on the outside. You know, we may arrest somebody for selling a rock of crack or snatching a purse, and that may be an underprivileged kid from an underserved community. And boy, doesn't the law jump on that kind of kid with both feet, maybe even put him in pretrial detention? And we sure as hell wouldn't be talking about release pending sentencing if a jury just convicted him of those relatively minor crimes. But what do we do to the ruling class criminals, right? And they may be black, they may be white. If you have money, you have power, you have influence, you have connections, you have friends in high places, Don, and you're caught committing crimes that may victimize large swaths of the American population, you know what DOJ does? They give them non-prosecution agreements, make them pay fines, penalties, and back taxes, and promise never to do it again. And we don't hold them accountable at all. And then they roll those fines, penalties, and back taxes into their operating budget. They keep committing crime, and they pass it on to us, the consumer, to pay off those fines. And that's how we treat the ruling class criminals, the people of power, influence, connection, friends in high places. And that can be, you know, big pharma, big tech, big oil, the military industrial complex, politicians, big Hollywood, big entertainment. It can be all of that. That is another disparity layered on top of the racial disparity that we often see. That, you know, I just wish to hell the DOJ would reprioritize, not in this administration. I think all hope is lost for a legitimate DOJ doing the, you know, work of the American people rather than the work of, you know, a corrupt wannabe dictator in the Oval Office. But I wish someday we could make inroads on reworking the priorities and going after the ruling class criminals who are exploiting and victimizing so many, not just the people who are snatching a purse or selling a rock of crack.
Yeah, we're joined now by the great Glenn Kirshner, who is watching us and has been talking about what's happening with the verdict. Also joined by former attorney Michael Cohen. Michael, you're muted, by the way. By former attorney, I'll unmute you. I'll try. No, can you? Yeah, there you go. Michael Cohen. Michael, as I understand, we've been discussing. You look at the activity. Wait, stand by, Michael. Glenn, you mentioned the whole idea of race, and look at what's happening outside of the courthouse. Is there any sound on this, Andy?
He got a chance to get back on.
Murphy's Law. Well, if you see it, go back to it. We'll bring it up. But anyway, he is obviously out there, black man, and talking about the very issue that we just discussed. But Michael, you said the prosecution did a terrible job. You know RICO cases. You know, you're from New York. You know this courthouse.
Well, I do know the courthouse. I never practiced criminal law, obviously, like Glenn and others. I understand RICO as the charge and so on. I think that this specific group of prosecutors overcharged Diddy in this case. You know, RICO is a very tough, it's not as simple as, you know, some people think. It's generally mob related. What they did here was somewhat unusual in terms of how they decided to bring about the charge. And they overcharged, and I think the jury did an absolute the jury did their job. Let me put it to you that way.
The jury did their job. That's all you'll say, Michael.
I think, again, that the prosecutors overcharged Diddy in this case. By the way, don't think for a second that the 2 counts that he was found guilty on, they each come, even though it'll probably run concurrent, you know, they carry up to 10 years.
Let's listen to this. Let's listen to this, Michael. Hold on one second. Glenn, we said it.
Yeah, you're going to, in these kind of high profile cases, you're going to have lots of people gravitate toward the courthouse, and they're going to be, you know, celebrating one thing or another. They're going to be celebrating an acquittal on.
Let me just say this as a black person. Those are black people celebrating. They're happy that Diddy was found not guilty on the 2 serious charges. I'm just saying. Yeah. I know.
And that's what I said. You're going to have people on both sides. They're celebrating the acquittals, celebrating the convictions, and you know, listen, like we were just talking about it, Don. There has been an unfairness that has run through our criminal justice system forever. Is it any surprise that people who have been the victim of that unfairness, can celebrate something that it seems to vindicate maybe what has been done to an entire population? That's not a surprise.
Yeah. Michael?
Hey, Glenn, if I can ask you a quick question here, take over, hijack Don's incredible show for a quick second.
I'm shocked that Michael Cohen would do such a thing. Wow.
Would you concur? I mean, while Diddy was found not guilty on the 3 most serious charges, which carried very long sentences, the RICO and so on, would you not agree that the 2 charges that he was found guilty on, they carry up to 10 years of imprisonment? I mean, this is not a full-fledged acquittal. Yeah, it's certainly a demonstration that the Southern District of New York, or as they like to declare themselves, the Sovereign District of New York, that their tactic, like the tactic they used with me of the bullying and using the pressure tactic of trying to or threatening to go after my wife, it didn't work with Diddy. And I say good for him for standing up. I just personally don't think the prosecutors had the right charge on that, again, overcharging. But this is certainly not the win that people are celebrating right now for Diddy.
No,
Well, hang on,
certainly.
before we
Go ahead,
talked about this a little bit, and there was
Yeah.
some disagreement amongst the panel, Michael, that Diddy may not see jail or prison again, that they may say time served. I think Glenn is of a different mind about that. Sorry to jump in, but I just wanted to make sure we talked about it.
And one of the prior panelists brought something to my attention that I didn't know, because I'm not watching the goings on in real time. But apparently the judge pressed the prosecutors and said, bring me a Mann Act case where somebody was convicted of a Mann Act violation and they were detained pending sentencing. That is ominous. But my view of that is, that's not precedent what happened in other cases with respect to these intensely personal and fact specific determinations, like whether somebody should be detained pending sentencing now that they've been convicted of felony crimes. But it's atmospheric precedent. It's something a judge is going to take into account when making the decision about whether to continue to detain him pending trial. In my experience in the courts of DC, if somebody was just convicted of a 20-year maximum series of crimes, that person is very likely going to be detained pending sentencing if there was enough evidence to detain them pending trial because they were a flight risk or a danger to the community or pose the risk of obstructing justice. So we'll see what the judge does, but this doesn't sound like it's a done deal that he will continue to be detained pending sentencing, or that he may see any more jail time other than time served. It's a wide open question, it feels like to me.
The time served, of course, is going to be predicated upon what the ultimate sentence by the judge, the determination, will be. If it's going to be, let's just say 10 years, because they're going to group the 2 charges that are similar together. Let's just say that they give them whatever, a 7-year, a 10-year sentence on this, which is an enormously long time. Take it from me, it's an enormously long time. This is not the win that I think many are celebrating, depending upon, again, as Don was saying, which side of the aisle you stand on. And I hope, and I do truly hope, that this isn't a racially based series of statements made by individuals, sort of like what we saw in the OJ case.
Michael, this is America. Yes, this will happen. Trust me, 100%.
Because I think there are plenty, Don, to be honest with you, I think there are plenty of white people who happen to like Diddy and like his music and like his talent as well.
I'm not sure what you mean by that, but there will be among the Black community people who say that he was targeted and he, should have gotten off completely, or they are happy at least that he was not found guilty of the most serious charges, because they believe he's targeted as a black man. Monique Presley just discussed that, and they will say, why did, and they are saying it now, why did Donald Trump get off? Why does he get off? Why do the white guys seem to get off with everything? Now, I'm just saying, and there are
Donald
rights.
Trump didn't get, hold on, we can't confuse the two, because Trump did not get off. He was found guilty on the 34 charges. He didn't do time because he won.
He's not in jail. He's not in jail, and he probably won't ever serve a day in jail. He will not serve a day in jail. Yeah.
Because he won the presidency of the United States of America. It's very, very different. Had he not won, I suspect that he may have served some time.
And because, not to interrupt, he has people that he put on the Supreme Court who gave him absolute immunity, put him above the law by and large. And that reinforces, I think, what we were talking about before, Don. If you are a ruling class criminal, and he is the pinnacle of the ruling class criminals, and you have friends in high places, then guess what? Justice and accountability will never come to visit you. And that is really an ongoing sin of our nation.
Yeah, look, we're not saying that it's about race, but this is America, and that aspect will certainly come up, as we saw the people celebrating there. I'm gonna, in a moment, let's bring in now Charles Coleman, who is joining us. Charles, thank you so much for joining us. I understand that you're a very busy man. You're in a car right now, traveling to and fro somewhere. What do you say? Look, we were talking about the racial aspect that people are talking about. There are people who are very happy about this, many of them African Americans. Those are saying, he was possibly targeted. Talk about that, and then your basic general thoughts on these verdicts.
Well, Don, I think that the racial aspect of the case is something that hurt the prosecution more than it helped the defense. And what I mean by that is, if the prosecution had more of a racially diverse and potentially gender diverse team prosecuting this case, then it would have more likely than not nullified that issue in front of the jury. Instead, you have, I think it was 4 different white women who were prosecuting this black man in front of a diverse New York jury, and he was being defended by, for all intents and purposes, a pretty diverse defense team. And so when you're talking about what's needed to cross-examine a witness like Cassie, they had it. You couldn't have someone who was super aggressive when they didn't need to be. You couldn't have someone who seemed like they were bullying her. When you had someone who needed to be aggressive, they had it. Someone who could make the argument, someone who could really drive those points home. So I think that the notion of race in this case is ever present, because you're talking about a New York jury who is going to sort of understand, in many respects, some of the nuances connected to race and how it could have, I'm not saying it did, but could have played a role in prosecutors seeking some of the charges that they did. And they did not have, the prosecution that is, an answer for it in the composition of their jury team. Now, in terms of my general thoughts, I have been thinking about this case and what it is that the defense team had done. And they stuck to one of the rules that you have to when you're defending a case, particularly a difficult case. There are 2 rules: deny what you can't admit and admit what you can't deny. And they did. They sort of criminal enterprise, because admitting such or conceding that type of point would have ultimately led them into a space where the racketeering charge absolutely would have come down against Sean Combs. But they denied everything. But they admitted everything that they couldn't deny, which was, look, this was a salacious, perhaps grotesque, perhaps personally offensive set of facts. But that's not what he's here for. That's not what he's being tried for. And so that's something that strategically they knew they had to do in order to balance out the evidence that was being placed in front of the jury with the arguments that they were going to make.
Hey, Charles, do you think that they overcharged him, as I do? You think that the Southern District of New York prosecutors overcharged Diddy in this case?
I think that the racketeering went a little... It's one of those things that, because racketeering and RICO cases were originated because of organized crime, and that's their sort of basis, the idea that you would try to take that and apply it in this context, I do think feels like overcharging. Now, let me be very clear. I think they had the evidence, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is even in having the evidence, even in being able to lay the case out and satisfy the elements of the crime, could you do that beyond a reasonable doubt in a way that was convincing to the jurors? And that's where I think they fell short. I think they fell short because the jury, number one, was not necessarily convinced that this was a case that needed to be in court to begin with. And then number two, the fact that the jury was not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the racketeering charge existed to the extent that a criminal enterprise existed on Sean Combs's behalf. So if there's any sort of overreach, I think that on a certain level, I don't want to go to the point of claiming jury nullification, but I do think that there may have been one or two jurors who felt like they shouldn't have been there, at least from the standpoint of the racketeering.
Yeah. Hey, Charles, let me ask you this. So what happens, they're going to go into court a little bit. They're going to discuss whether, how much he's going to get, whether he's going to get out on, bail or bond or whatever. Is that going to happen? Or there are folks here, legal minds, attorneys who said they don't believe that he's going to serve another day. They think it's going to be time served.
It's interesting. I have practiced in front of Judge Subramanian before. I don't expect him to get anywhere near the maximum. Prosecutors are asking, or they say that they intend to ask for the maximum of 20 years, which would basically be the maximum of each of the two counts that he was convicted on served concurrently. I'm sorry, served consecutively. I don't see that happening at all. I don't see, he has been in prison for a little bit of time now. He's been in jail awaiting his trial, and during his trial, I don't see him being given time served, but it is conceivable that he might end up getting something in the 5 to 7 range. And given the time served and then the amount of time that he would have to spend in order to satisfy that under federal guidelines, he would be out sooner than later. I am more curious, Don, interestingly enough, as to see whether Judge Subramanian, pending his sentence, allows him to walk out of court today. As you all likely know, both of the attorneys have been ordered by the judge to provide letters as to the bail status of Diddy between now and his sentencing. And his attorneys have argued, look, he should be walking away today, a free man out of court. I am more curious about that because I think it will give a level of insight as to how the judge is thinking about sentencing, but we shouldn't read too much into it because there are going to be a number of different motions that take place between now and the day that he's actually sentenced. But I don't think, Don, that we're looking at a situation where Judge Subramanian is just basically going to say, time served, go home. I think that he will sentence him to something, even if the amount of time that he has served takes up a majority of whatever the ultimate sentence ends up becoming.
Very Solomonian of you.
Did Don freeze on us?
Yeah, Don froze on us. So I'll take over. Glenn, you agree? You agree with Charles? Because I think Charles is spot on, by the way.
Yeah, no, I do agree. And I love Charles' observation that, listen, if you're a smart defense attorney and defense team, admit what you have to admit and then deny what you are able on the evidence to deny. Because when defense attorneys go in there and tell the jury to disregard everything, disbelieve all of the evidence, even perhaps something they may have seen on videotape, I would always stand up in rebuttal and say, if you are of a certain vintage, you might remember Groucho Marx's line, who you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And that's exactly the point Charles was getting at. And you listen, evidence is important, but guess what? Lawyering is just about as important.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I got to tell you, we're going to continue to follow the breaking news. There's a break in the court, and we're going to get a break in, and we'll be back when there's other news to report. I lost you for a minute here because I lost connectivity. Anyway, you guys can hear me, correct?
Yes, we can. Don't worry, Don. Don't worry. I took over in your absence.
Shocking, Michael Cohen. Okay, so thank you.
Someone's got to watch your back.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate you guys jumping in. This is an incredible breaking news. I'll see you guys soon here on the Don Lemon Show. We'll be watching each of you on your platforms, Michael, especially on Substack, and Glenn with our friend Brian Tyler Cohen, and then Charles on MSNBC and everywhere, and hopefully here on the Don Lemon channel as well. Thank you, gentlemen. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, so have a good day until I see you again. So here we go. This is, you know, shocking to some folks, not shocking to others, especially a lot of the legal minds who predicted that this could happen, that some folks thought that he would be found not guilty on everything. And then there were others who said, oh, of course he's going to go. He's going to. We will see. They're going to decide not necessarily sentencing, they're going to decide whether he's released now, at least, and is able to jump on that private plane, as Symone Redwine said that there was a private plane. Or was it Symone? No, someone said there was a private plane waiting for him and that he's able to go home. So there you go. We thank you so much for watching. I wanted to make sure that you hit the like, hit the thumbs up, become a member, and also subscribe to the channel. It's very important to us. And also, if you go to donlemon.com, you can check out, if you want to know how to support us, go to donlemon.com, check out our merch page. Also, check it out on our main page here on YouTube. Okay, so for whatever platform you're watching us on, whether it's Substack, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever it is, we thank you so much for watching. We're going to be back here. As I say, you can be informed without being inundated. Don't sit in front of the television all day and just getting outraged, all right? Tune into us and we'll let you know what's important. So we'll see you back here for sure, live at 5 p.m. Eastern here on YouTube and everywhere that we stream normally. And if we have to jump in, if there is some big breaking news, if Diddy gets to go home and we can carry that for you live, we'll jump on the Don Lemon channel and bring it to you. So until then, turn the TV off. Thanks everyone for watching. Your support means the world to us. So make sure you hit the like button and you subscribe to our channel to make sure that you never ever miss a video. We're live every day, 10 a.m. Eastern time. We drop even more content at 2 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Eastern. And if you want more Don Lemon Show content, we'd love for you to become a member of the Lemon community, where you will receive access to special community posts. You'll get exclusive content and members-only live shows. So head over to our channel page or click the join button on this video. Again, thank you for watching. We appreciate your love and your support, and we will see you